continuing from the last week on מצמיח Karen Yeshua. The bracha in Tefillah, Shmona Esrei, that we have, right, that refers to the Messianic redemption, is as tzemach David avdacha mehirat atzmiach, and the sprout of David, your servant, quickly it should sprout. Baruch atah Hashem, Matzmiach Karen Yeshua. Blessed are you, Hashem, who sprouts the horn of redemption. Right? We find in this bracha tzmicha sprouting 3 times, right? And the use of the language tzmicha, right, expresses the development growth of redemption, messianic redemption. And using this word, this root, litzmoach, to sprout, to grow, as a plant does, is found in many places in the Nevim and Kesuvim. All right, and we are going to look at a bunch of them. The first one is Yirmiyahu Lamed Gimel Pasuk Tes Vav. Hine Yamim Ba'im. I have another one here. Hine Yamim Ba'im. This isn't there, I don't think. Num Hashem.
Yes, on this page 2.
On page 2, all right. And it will be in those days, God affirms, Vakimosi David Semach Tzadik. I will have a righteous sprout of David. Malach Melech, and he will rule as a king. V'skil ve'asa mishpat tzedkah בארץ, and he will be wise, enlightened, and do judgment and righteousness in the land. The Radak explains this as tzemach Tzadik, the sprout of the Tzadik, Zehu HaMashiach. This is Mashiach, right? So that when the Navi uses the term, at least here, tzemach, right? He's referring to not the Tzemach Tzedek of Lubavitch, but Mashiach. וקראו צמח, and he's called Tzemach. שיהיה צייס בעולם כצאת צמח השדה. And he was called this because he will go out just like herbage grows in the fields. Right? Now, we'll talk more about what that means. In another place in Yirmiyahu, Lamed Gimel Tesvav, I have them in the reverse order on my sheet, I'm sorry. Bimmim Atzmiach David Tzemach Tzedkah. And it will be in those days, at this time, I will sprout for David a sprout of righteousness, ועשה משפט וצדקה בארץ, and he will do justice and righteousness in the land. And the Radak again says, tzemach tzedakah, zehu melech Mashiach. Tzemach tzedakah is melech Mashiach. And so these are 2 from Yirmiyahu. We also have in Zecharya, Kehine מביא as Avdi tzemach, and I will bring my servant tzemach. מביא גם כאן, the Radak also brings here, Zehu melech Mashiach. This is Mashiach, right? Perek Vav Pasuk Yud Beis, there, in again in Zechariah. V'amarti elav lemor, and I will say to him, saying, Ko amar Hashem tzvaos, thus says the Lord of hosts, lemor, saying, Hine ish tzemach shemo, there is a man, tzemach will be his name, Mechtachtav yitzmach uvanas heichal Hashem, and under him it will sprout and build the heichal Hashem. Heichal is a palace or a very large building, meaning a large room in the building. So these psukim, right, are clearly the source from which Anshe Genesis Gedola, when they're creating a bracha about Mashiach, right, about we daven for Mashiach, use the terminology tzemach, right? The sprouting. Because that's the term the Nevi'im use. There's a lot within it, right? And if you think about it, if you compare the sprouting of a plant to dawn that Rabbi Chia used, there are some differences. First of all, the growth of a plant is slow, right? It doesn't pop out. It takes some time, right? When it begins, it's hidden from you, right? The seed, when it begins to sprout, it's underground, right? I cannot see it. Just like as we said when we were discussing Rabbi Chia, right? You cannot see dawn as it first starts to happen, right? It gets darker before it gets light, So that's, and the third thing is an interesting thing. The seed rots before it sprouts, right? If you, we're going to talk about this much more later, but in Yecheskel, he talks about Gullus being the grave. And Klal Yisrael in Gullus is a dead body in the grave. And he explains that's why Yerida Sodoros occurs. And he goes through the stages, right? The first thing that rots in the grave are the eyes, right? The very softest tissue, right? And then harder things, and finally tendons and muscles and tendons, and eventually the bones. But it takes a long, long time. And he relates each of these stages of the rotting of the body to the various tekufos, to the various time period of Tanaim and Amoraim and Gaonim and Rishonim and Achronim that we have, right, after the destruction of the temple and the Jews in exile. However, Yerida Sodoros is not a concept when Israel is living in its land. When the Chazal determine who is the greatest Navi after Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is in the category of himself, right? He's the father of all the Nevi'im, both in front of him, before him, and after him, right? He's just a unique category. But after him is Hosea, who's toward the end of Bayis Rishon. So approximately 800 years after Moshe Rabbeinu. If there were direct Yerida Sodoros, Yeshua would be the greatest Navi after Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And then each one after him would be less. But we don't have that. So this is a concept that applies to them. The next section is Hagula Talich TV. That redemption is a natural process. When you look at the sprouting or the dawn, right, it's a process. It's not something that happens instantly. A miracle isn't a process, right? It's an instant change, right? When the Nevi'im don't talk about Mashiach as a miracle, they talk about it as a process. So too, Rav Teichtel, Hashem Yikam Tamo, in his Sefer Emabdim Smecha, writes as follows: Mimela muchach mikol zeh. It is clear from all of this, the fact that the Nevi'im compare redemption to sprouting. Yeshua seinu shela'atid titzmach b'derech hateva. That our future salvation will sprout in a natural way. Rotzei lomar, that is to say, b'neis ha'melubash b'teva, a miracle that is dressed in nature. All right? It is a miracle, but it appears to us as natural. Ve'al ken yitztarech l'zeh et hishtalshalut hateva. Therefore, it has to go through time as a natural process. Sheba b'ma'at me'at v'lo b'vasachas. It has to come a little bit at a time, and not at one time. Is it miraculous? Think about this. People will tell you, or would have told you, that a dead language never comes back to life. But we did it. Right? People will tell you a nation that's completely driven off its land, it's finished. These are, you look at the fact that we essentially had no weapons in Tashach, in Israel's War of Independence. And if you read the 6 days of Yad Mordechai, by the way, it's an atrociously written book. All right? I don't know whether it's in print anymore. People want to read it. I can find it for them. I have one here someplace. But it's very useful to read. You see that they had almost nothing. And the entire force of the Egyptian army was on this one kibbutz. Right? They were outnumbered more than 100 to 1. And they held out for 6 days. Right? It's not possible. But, Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, he was the president of the World Zionist Organization before that. His autobiography is called "The Impossible Takes Longer." So it was impossible for them to hold out, so it took longer to conquer them. But this is sometimes you have to open your eyes to see what's happening, and there are people that unfortunately refuse to do that. Choshech v'or mishamshim be'eruvia. Darkness and light are mixed up altogether. We've learned that redemption is a process, right, that conducts itself in a natural way, one stage after another, right? And by the way, if someone would have told you, in, let's say, 1882, when Petach Tikva was founded, the first agricultural settlement period, right? That in 76 years, there's going to be a Jewish state here, right? You're dreaming. It's not going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was a child, if someone told me that there would be more Jews living in Eretz Yisrael than the United States in my lifetime, I would have said, you're dreaming. I mean, what kind of thing is this? And, right, it happens in this process, this slow process, that it's only once you're well into it that it's possible to detect that what's going on. And in such things, there are advances and there are descents. There are difficulties, right? And people ask from time to time, what's going on? Is this really, the prospect of redemption? Or maybe it's a false hope. Right? People say this all the time. Rabbi Chia taught us, right, that it's like the appearance of dawn, that it's very dark, and very slowly the light comes to us, right? And only once it's fully light, he says, can you see that the redemption has occurred. Right? It's only that when you get to that point you can look back. This property that Rabbi Chia is talking about it still being dark as redemption is started, is found in Zecharya. V'haya b'yom hahu, and it will be on that day. V'haya yom echad, lo yeh or yikrot v'kipaon. It won't be the light or frozen, V'haya yom echad, it will be one day. Hu yodea l'Hashem, that is known to God. Lo yom v'lo laila, it's neither day nor night. Vayaleis erev ye'or, and at the time of night, the time of evening, it's dark. By the way, when you go through a day, what happens in nighttime, in the evening?
It starts getting darker.
It gets dark, right? What does the Navi say happens in the evening?
It gets light.
Gets light. It's light. Right? This is not a normal day, right? And in a normal day, it's dark, it's nighttime, right? Think of a Shabbos, right? We start with the night, it slowly gets light, it gets bright, and it gets dark. That's not what he's talking about. It's not day and it's not night for the entire time period of this day. And at the end of the day, there's light. Right? So Rashi explains, all right? V'lo yom v'lo laila. It's neither day or night. Lo or noga ka'or shel olam haba. It's not the bright light of the world to come. V'lo es tzara k'tzaras shibud gulios. And it is not a time of tzoros. There is no good translation for the word tzoros into any other language in the world other than Yiddish, and the translation into Yiddish is tzaros. Of the enslavement of exile. It's neither, right? Rashi's explaining to us, right, that this is not a physical day, right? This is a time period where there are good things and there are bad things, right? And it's never as bad as the times of exile. It's never going to be, until the end of the process, as good as redemption, right? I mean, if you look at, take a random survey of half a dozen pogroms, right? What we suffered a year and a half ago was not so bad in historical perspective, right? And if you want to compare it to the Holocaust, it's not even, what?
Not even an hour.
Right. I mean, it's like...
That's why it's so shocking, because it hasn't been like that. It's been so good for us. Maybe that's why
In our land.
Yeah, but so we have struggles in our land. That's what the Navi is telling us. Here we're going to have some touch of exile.
But it's so much better than anything.
It's still better than it was before. And we're also going to have some of the lights of salvation. The Radak has a similar parish. By the way, most people don't realize it. But on Nach, the primary parish is Radak, not Rashi, among the Rishonim. And if you want to talk in general, the most commonly learned parish is the Metzudas. Lo yom v'lo laila, not day and not night. Lo ye kulo yom v'lo kulo laila. It's not all day and it's not all night. Kolomar, lo ye kulo tzara v'lo kulo revacha. It's not all tzoros and it's not all
praise and happiness.
Well, revach is
Like
benefits, yeah.
it's benefit, but it's also revacha is like relaxing, stretched out.
Mm-hmm.
Fruits.
We've got this time where we have both of them working together, and it's something that is not necessarily so easy for us to deal with both the good and bad parts. And we have to take both of them in context. And we have to be realistic. When a certain Rosh Hashiva says that we were much better off when the Arabs ruled us in Eretz Yisrael, he is high on something. I'm not sure what, but he's high on something. Yeah.
Cold delusion.
Well, these people have created a myth of what the world is. And so they have to keep on saying all this garbage to justify their...
Narrative.
What?
Narrative.
Yes. And they're literally inventing such garbage, like there was a Rishon LeZion recently that said a couple years ago that there was no government ever in the history of the world that was so oppressive to learning Torah as the government of the State of Israel today. I would love to send him to 1943 Germany and see how his yeshiva does in Berlin.
How about SARS Russia? Or
Any other Middle Eastern country where there was great Torah learning? Iraq? Oh no.
Yeah, anyway. Kima. Little by little. Or step by step as it's now translated. But kima little means a little bit. The principle that Geula advances little by little appears a lot in the writings of the Achronim, the later rabbinic authorities, and we will have just a few of them. If we tried to list all of them, we could be here forever. The first one is the Sefer Kol HaTorah. Most of the Svarim, quote, of the Vilna Gaon were not written by the Vilna Gaon. He wrote very little, and what he wrote is almost incomprehensible. It's a list of Roshei Tevos that he put together for himself, and you read his commentary on Shulchan Aruch or so on, and you just go, I have no idea what this, you really have to know the material extremely well to be able to figure out anything. However, his Talmidim did write down a significant amount of his Torah, and Kol HaTorah, the voice of the turtle dove, referring to Kol HaTorah Nishma Be'eretzena, right? The dove is heard in our land, right? So it's I wouldn't even call it a book. I would call it a pamphlet. It's like this thick. It's a pamphlet. It's a booklet, not a pamphlet. It's a booklet. So in chapter 1, paragraph 15, he writes, L'das mirosh, ki aschalta de geula ba kima kima. You have to know that the beginning of redemption comes little by little. Me'at me'at. I don't know why a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon is translating kima kima, which is the Aramaic for little by little, into the Hebrew me'at me'at, unless he really wants to stress it, that it's a slow process. Al pi Chazal, according to our rabbis, kach higulasan shel Yisrael. This is the way that Israel be redeemed. Kima kima. Ba ke alas hashachar. A little bit like the dawn, the gazelle of the dawn. Ki yashev b'choshech Hashem orli. When I sit in darkness, God will be my light. Holech ve'or ad nachon hayom. I go through the light until it becomes proper day, right? Meaning I go through the little bits of light of dawn. L'chen kol pula shel atchalta yesh latchil afinu b'me'at. So anything that's a beginning, we start even with a little bit. All right? By the way, I remember talking to Rav Drukman about when he was in high school in Kfar Haraway, the only religious Zionist high school when he was of high school age. I mean, he died at 92 years ago, so figure out how long ago it was, right? This is like the end of the mandate, the beginning of the state, right? There was Bekoshi, a minion in the school, all right? And nonetheless, Rav Shal Yisraeli was already known as even though he's young, was known as one of the great Gedolim there itself. He was the Rav of Kfar Haraway, would come to give shir, even though it was such a small group. Like, this is the beginning. And now, that was the first Bnei Akiva high school. How many are there now in the country? Try and figure it out. It's like hundreds, right? Like you start with a little bit and you keep working at it. Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher, right, who is a Talmid Muvhak of Rabbi Kiveger, and his Sefer Drishat Zion. Gulat Yisrael Asher Nachnu Chochim La'a, the redemption of the Jewish people that we are waiting for it. Al Yechshov V'Choshev Ki Pitom Yerad Hashem Yitbarach Shemo Mishamayim Eretz Lemor Lamitzau. Do not think that Hashem Yisbarach, God, His name should be blessed, suddenly comes down to heaven to earth and tells His people to go. Or Yishlach Mashiach Kerega Min Hashemayim, He sends Mashiach down in a second from heavens. Litkoa b'shofar gadol al nidchei Yisrael, to blow the shofar for the scattered ones of Israel. V'yikabtzem Yerushalayim, and He will gather them to Yerushalayim. V'yasei la chomas eish umikdash el miromim yarad, and He will make a wall of fire surrounding them, and the temple of God will descend. Kasher hivtiach al yedei avadav hanavim, like the prophets talk about. Lo ken korei hamaskil, not so, my enlightened reader. Vade kol yudei hanavim iskaimu be'achrisa yamim. It is 100% sure that all of the visions of the destiny of the prophets will be fulfilled in the end of days. V'lo yipol chas v'shalom tavarotza. Not one word, not one thing will not be fulfilled. We're not going to throw one thing to the ground. Ach lo b'mnusan nilech, but we're not going to run quickly. V'lo b'chipazon yom echad, and not with the rush of one day. Ki im ma'at me'at tavo gulas Yisrael. It will be a little at a time will come the redemption of Israel. La'at la'at tatzmiach keren Yeshua. Slowly, slowly will sprout the horn of redemption. Ad v'Yisrael yaseh chayil, until Israel does valor. V'yiskei ma'od b'achriso, and he will be very raised, he will be very exalted in the end. B'kiyum kol ha'yudim v'haftachot shel hanavim hakadoshim, like all of the destiny and the guarantees of the holy Nevim. Kasher avarer be'ezras Hashem min haksuvim b'divrei Rabbeinu zechronam l'bracha, like I will prove from the various psukim and from what our rabbi said. Similarly, if you think, by the way, of the Achronim, whose commentaries on Tanakh are widely used, the Malbim is probably the most used commentary today of the Achronim. I mean, Rishonim, of course, they're more used, but above the Achronim, he's the greatest. He did not have a very pleasant life. His life was a tough life, but he managed to write a lot. Not only, he's only known for his commentary on Tanakh, but he wrote other svarim as well. Well, one of the most interesting is where he compares all similar words in Tanakh and explains exactly what the differences are, the shades of meaning between them. Very useful sefer. I don't remember the name of it. I remember it was in one shul in Los Angeles, and I would go there and read it like before mincha every day for like 6 months to get through the entire sefer. I've never been able to find it for sale. It'll be Iker Hadavar. So the Malbim was asked by Rav Kalisher his opinions on these things, and he responds in the part of the letter reads, Ubeikar hadavar, and the principle of the matter, devarav amitim v'kinim, everything that you say in your book Trishat Zion is true and correct. V'yeshli kama rayos mi peshutei eksuvim kamo pirushi, kafi pirushi, and I have many proofs for this that can be found in my comments on them. Ki agula titzmach la'atlat, that the redemption sprouts little by little. Ubeshachar nachon motzao, and like the morning, it will come out. Holech ve'or ad nachoniyam, it will go and light up until the day is complete. V'yeh yishuv Eretz Yisrael kodem bias Mashiach, and the settlement of Eretz Yisrael comes before Mashiach. All right? By the way, this is the exact opposite of what the Satmar Rebbe said. right? The Malbim is saying that the simple meaning of these psukim is that it's a process. And he is going to tell you that, in fact, you cannot find a single place in Tanakh where it talks about the Messianic redemption being instant, unless you look in their Bible, which we don't do. Ve'ata, and he ends with the pasuk from Micha. Ve'ata migdal eder ofel, bat Zion ed yadacha tatei, uva hamemshala harishona, mamleches levat Yerushalayim. And this is going to be a tower, right? The daughter of Zion will adorn herself, sweep away the dreck, right? And we will come to the first kingdom, the kingdom of the daughter of Yerushalayim. The Malbim explains this, all right? Techila bas Tzion ediatate. At first, the daughter of Zion, right, will adorn herself. Shegalios yatchilu lihitkabetz. That the exiles will begin to gather in. The Galus Yehuda uVinyamin Shem Bas Tzion, and the exile of Yehuda and Binyamin, that they are called Bas Tzion, Shegalu Mitzion B'chorban Ba'isheni Yitkabtu Alecha, and that they were the exiles of Zion from the second Chorban Bais, they will gather to her. V'acher kach, and after that, Uva HaMemshala Rishona, then will come the first kingdom. Tavo Memshala Katana, there will be a little kingdom. She'elehem K'tzas Memshala, they will have a little bit of rule. Vanhaga, and direction. Kamoshayu Yisrael B'yamim Harishonim, like we had in the beginning. Lifnei Meloch Melech Livnei Yisrael, before there was a king of Israel. She'elehem Shoftim Manhigimotam, where they had Shoftim judge them. By the way, if you think about what he's describing, it's not full rule, but it's like some rule. If you study the history of the Jews in Mandate Palestine,
that would sum it up.
This would sum it up. V'acher kach tavo mamleches bas Yerushalayim, and after that will come the kingdom of the daughter of Yerushalayim. Yelehem malchus kavua, they'll have a set kingdom. Shu malchus beis David, this will be the kingdom of David. She'acher kach, and after that, yimloch hamelech hamashiach b'mamlecha kavua. Then the Messianic king will rule. Right? And so he's actually describing three kingdoms here. There's this semi rule, there's rule, and then there's Melech HaMashiach. And he was writing this, 1830s, 1840s.
Before there was even the yeshuv in here.
Before there was there was a yeshuv, but there was no agricultural yeshuv.
What do you mean by semi-rule?